is increasing in value, like doubling every 18 months, auctioning it off at a fixed price doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? The most logical thing to me as an engineer, not a regulator, nor am I an economist, is that people ought to pay for the spectrum based upon the kind of value they get out of it, and they ought to pay on a continuing basis. People somehow ought to be motivated to improve the way they use the spectrum. There are too many. I hate to keep picking on the broadcasters, although if I was a broadcaster, I would have done the same thing. But it's got to be a travesty to be using technology that's 60 years old, when Moore's law says that we doubled the number of devices on a chip every 18 months, and we have known for 50 of those 60 years how to put two TV channels right next to each other. And where there is clear evidence that somebody can come in and use the spectrum, there's got to be a way to persuade, to come up with measurements that will motivate people to allow other people to come and share spectrum. And there are a lot of ways of doing that, and we can talk about ultra-wideband or things of that nature. But once again, I'm meddling here in stuff that I really don't understand very well. But those are my regulatory suggestions.
Could you just follow that up by commenting on the relative position of Europe, or perhaps Japan, with the U.S. in terms of regulation? Are they ahead of us in some areas or behind us, or what?
They do have different methods. They don't sell spectrum in Japan. The Europeans auction it off for huge amounts of money, and they're sorry they did it. But I put that in the category of this regulatory meddling. They're working on the small problems and not thinking about the big problem. The big issue is, a million times improvement in 50 years. Regulators ought to be thinking about 50 years, 20 or 30 anyway. So they ought to be thinking about, how can I get multiples of spectrum? And instead, these things we talk about are shuffling, and most countries do it one way or another. And I don't think anybody is in a very different situation. For a while, the Europeans were bragging about how the fact that their cellular service was so much better than ours. And so I did my own study on that, which means I went to Europe. And I discovered that the Europeans had about the same number of dropped calls that we do, except they paid more for the privilege of having a dropped call. So my perception is not much difference. Yes, sir. Next.
Drew Clark with the Center for Public Integrity. I have two questions. One, could you speak a little bit about we sort of broke through the regulatory process because, as I understand it, Motorola had and AT&T had prototypes back in 48, 49, and they had petitions before the FCC at that time. Could you just sort of talk briefly about from 48 till 68, say, and what happened there? And secondly, let me just throw this question out too, so you can address it. There's been some talk in recent weeks about whether the wireless industry needs a Carter phone decision of its own, which would basically mean that you could take your phone and use it on any cellular network, which of course you cannot do, whereas you can do that on the wired world. So if you have any thoughts on either of those subjects?
Well, those are two really interesting questions. I'll take a shot at the first one because the concept of cellular was invented, and you must have known that because you picked that year, at about 1946 or 7. A guy named John Reed at Bell Laboratories figured out this approach of using spectrum reuse and handoff, which is all that cellular is, right? And he put that in the file. And at Bell Laboratories, putting a memo in the file was considered to be a great privilege because people looked at those. And it stayed there in the file until the mid-'60s, late 60s. And remember, I was not at AT&T. I was at Motorola, this little tiny company in Chicago. AT&T was the biggest company in the world by every measure. And AT&T then made a proposal to the FCC that they could build a new system called cellular, that they could, within this new system, accommodate public switch telephone, telephony, air-to-ground, and private land mobile. And they could do this very efficiently, that they were the only company in the world with the technical resources. They're only a company in the world with the money. And you could imagine what our reaction was, because Motorola had a very strong position in private land mobile at that time. And so we took great umbrage to this. The worst part about this AT&T proposal was, what was their version of cellular? Car telephones. And we really thought that was abhorrent, because at that time I was running a little business at Motorola that was portable communications, and we were selling phones that people could carry with them. You didn't get that message at the beginning. People are mobile, right? So we took AT&T on. I mean, I have nothing but admiration for the management of a little company that would take on the biggest company in the world. But that, in fact, is what we did. And we spent many years, I wrote many filings that maybe some people in this room actually read at one time or another. But in 1973, which is beyond what you asked about, we got word that the FCC was about to make a decision, and we were in a very competitive business. Competitors always run scared. And so we had to do something dramatic. And what we did was literally create an entire product line. First of all, at 900 megahertz, I didn't mention that the spectrum that AT&T asked for was 900 megahertz spectrum. We had been, I hate to talk about people retarding advances in innovation, but we had been telling the FCC for a number of years that 900 megahertz was totally impractical, much too high in frequency. We didn't have the devices, cost too much. We wanted more spectrum at 450 megahertz. Now we had to change our mind and tell them we really could use 900 megahertz. We created an entire product line of base stations, mobile radios, and I figured, well, we've gone that far. I think I can build a cellular telephone. And we did that too. And we put out a huge demonstration in Washington, literally shut down the company for 3 months. We did no engineering other than building all of this equipment, did our demonstration in Washington. Whether it had anything to do with it or not, several months later, the FCC did in fact allocate spectrum for cellular, and they incorporated in that several characteristics. Number one, to answer your second question, you had to have, partly, you had to have resale. It was a requirement. You could not offer service without letting other people come in and at least sell service. Multiple carriers. There was not no monopoly. Unfortunately, they decided to have just 2 carriers. There must be something in economics that says that a duopoly, in many cases, is worse than monopoly. Is that right, Frank? But it is certainly a truism in the business. But that got fixed. We end, as you know now, we have, one way or another, through industry efforts, we dropped the power requirements so that portable telephony was in fact practical. It took another 15 years before portables became practical and useful. But it's the best I can do. Carter phone, you know, I really can't touch that without offending people. But what do you think? Well, anybody got an opinion about Carter? Is there any reason why?
There seem to be some good engineering arguments against it, but I'm not sure if they're really true. That you need to have a tighter integration between the device and the network.
You sound exactly like the AT&T guys at the Carter time. That's all I have to say about that. Yes,
I've got a two-part.
In fact, it's a monopoly. It's a much different market. And the AT&T with a regulated monopoly and barriers to entry makes an argument. Doesn't mean it's wrong for a different market with competitive carriers.
Well, I guess the way I interpreted your question was, shouldn't somebody be able to buy a cell phone that meets a standard and use that cell phone?
Well, they are able to do that.
No, they are not.
Yeah, they are.
Well,
You
some
can
places.
unlock phones.
Some places yes, some places no.
You can unlock phones. They're just
That's all. That's GSM.
People
You
prefer,
can't unlock a CDMA phone. So and my sources tell me that at least the Europeans would have the most open market, are now trying to figure out some ways to lock the phones
Well, that's what
more
I'm saying,
securely.
but there are efficiency reasons. This is all he's saying. There are efficiency reasons for integrating the services with the hardware.
I'm not sure I understand that, Tom. What do you?
Well, consumers, first of all, I think you can buy unlocked CDMA. I'll defer to you as the expert, but I think that's wrong. You can buy GSM phones that are unlocked. Hardly anybody does. There's a reason for that. The reason probably lies in the efficiency, as
You
John, you're not supposed to shake your head.
The reason that people don't need unlocked phones is the only reason because there aren't many people selling phones that are not provided by the carrier.
There's no barrier to entry. I mean, you could I mean, the fact is, yes, that's part of the problem. People can't make it go in that business.
I'll tell you why I think this is really, we're getting off of technology. You know, I'm a technologist. Anybody here been in a cellular store lately? Did you see a big variety of phones? You see a lot of really complicated phones, and they all have cameras. They all have music. And who is it that decides what the characteristics of the phone are?
The carrier.
Right. In a free market with unlocked phones, there would be other people coming in and offering a variety of different kinds of services, and I think that's going to happen, Tom. It takes time. We are in an immature...
Why can't you have a competition amongst business models? I mean, that's actually what we have. There's no law against having unlocked phones. We have unlocked phones. And in fact, the market organizes around a different model. Unless you think the government can plan this better than this competitive...
no, I don't think the government ought to do that. Is that what you're talking about?
Could you comment?
Wait, let me finish this. Wait a second. My position is, I didn't want to say this, but my position is you shouldn't have to unlock the phones, but since you can, it's irrelevant. I think the market will ultimately, because we are an immature business, it's taken a while, but ultimately there's going to be competition. The manufacturers are going to build a wide variety of phones and services, and then we are going to be using unlocked phones and doing essentially, I think that's going to happen by natural force.
Could you explain your new business venture?
Oh.
Apropos to this topic.
Well.
You don't have to do it.
Well, no, I actually would be. Tom wants me to sell phones, which I'm really good at. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't I close with that, Tom? Okay. But remind me to tell you about Jitterbug before we leave.
Two-part question. One of them picking up on this whole discussion, but it's a little bit broad. Steve Miller. Two-part question. The first one, I have a two-part question.
Oh, okay.
The first part dovetails with this last discussion, but it's a little bit broader, and that is the question: as we go forward, of the triumvirate of cell phone, cellular, wireless providers, whatever the proper terminology is. Technologists and regulators, which one of those three is going to be the most important in driving forward the next generation of wireless systems? Is it the cellular carriers, or what I call provider, or the technology folks, or is it going to be the regulators?
Yeah.
And then the second part to the question has nothing to do with any of that. It's why the hell did Motorola lose their advantage to Nokia? I worked for Motorola for a year and a half.
Did you? Yeah.
Not in a cellular capacity, and I'm just flabbergasted at some of the attitudes.
I know the answer to part A, but part B, I'm not so sure. If I knew that, I'd probably be running Motorola today.
Being the dean of a business school someday.
Yeah, maybe. Part A, none of the above.
Consumer?
Well, strictly speaking, I love the way you said that. In every other industry in the world, who decides what the product is? It is the consumer. The industry spends enormous amounts of money trying to tailor products, and you can buy virtually anything you could ever conceive of. My best example is an automobile. You can almost design an automobile to your exact needs, the color, upholstery, the size of the car, the features. You may be able to, it's possible that you could build a car that